Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles, the Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the Sencast. If this is your first Sencast, then welcome. Welcome to the podcast focusing on special educational needs and disability where everybody learns. In this episode, we discuss the impact of dyslexia in the classroom and why this is so misunderstood and still unsupported. And this was discussed with Jane Craig and Samantha Buttle from Dyslexia Sparks, a charity supporting schools, parents and individuals with dyslexia. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. And have you heard of our AI that we have in our assessment software? Teachers can use our AI to help write their reports or summarise progress, and teachers choose the key achievements or key next steps for each pupil. So it is very, very personalised. It's not a generic bank of statements. The AI takes the hard work away, turning those statements into a lovely paragraph of text that you can share. And the system can translate that paragraph into 40 different languages. So it helps engage parents where English is not their first language. Visit the B Squared website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and those AI features. Now, let's get on with the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing how does dyslexia impact the classroom. My guests on this week's episode are Jane Craig and Samantha Buttle from Dyslexia Sparks, a charity supporting schools, parents and individuals with dyslexia. Jane spent 10 years in higher education before choosing to focus and specialise in dyslexia as a tutor and assessor. In 2016, she founded Dyslexia Sparks, and Samantha trained as a dyslexia specialist within her teaching degree, and after several years in mainstream education, she wanted to focus more on dyslexia. Samantha joined Dyslexia Sparks back in 2016 and whilst working at the charity found out that she is dyslexic, subconsciously using all the strategies she had learned to support herself. Welcome to the show, Jane and Samantha.
Thank you, Dale. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
You are welcome. So today we're discussing the impact of dyslexia in the classroom. And I think one of the first hurdles people hit is what they think dyslexia is and what it actually is. It's often different. And there are those who know and understand what dyslexia really is, and those who think dyslexia only impacts reading and is linked to low intelligence. So shall we just discuss what dyslexia is before we move on to the impact? Who wants to go?
Yeah, I'll kick off if that's all right. Yes. So you're right. There's definitely lots of variation in, the levels of understanding that people have of dyslexia. And partly, as we know, that's brought about by lack of training within the education system in terms of teacher training. We certainly meet lots of teachers who know lots, and that's great. But yeah, there's lots of work to be done still in terms of deepening that understanding. And often the sort of initial expectations are that dyslexia is very much about reading, and we get lots of comments about words jumping about on the page, and therefore let's use a coloured overlay and that will fix everything. But dyslexia is really about lots of processes within the brain. And ultimately, it's about people processing information in a different way from people that are not dyslexic, typically. So that does affect reading often, but it also affects lots of other things within the classroom and within daily life, partly because there's quite often difficulties with memory, for example, that impact on lots of things. And speed of processing is often a difficulty, which makes taking in new information hard, and we might need it to come in different ways. And a core difficulty for a lot of dyslexic people also is processing sounds and that type of information, which is where the link often comes about with reading and spelling skills in the earlier years as well.
Not just reading.
Definitely not.
Definitely not.
Now, I think obviously all three of us knew that. Hopefully all three of us knew that. But it's one of the things I always like to start there, because anyone who listens and is going, oh, I need to support dyslexia in the classroom, is we've got to make sure everyone's clear that actually the starting point is it's impacting in much more places than you probably think. It's not just giving them a colour overlay or making big text or maybe giving them in a different format. There's a lot more going on. And as always, it's not simply here is the 10-step checklist to support dyslexia, because dyslexia is different for every child and every adult. So it just makes things much more fun, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's often about that finding out what's right for that individual, isn't it? And we as specialists, but also at our charity, we focus a lot on what is that individual facing as barriers, but also, what are their strengths, what things are they good at, what will help them to overcome them barriers in terms of what they can do, what they're good at. And so it can be difficult for teachers, can't it? Because they do want that check, they do want that list of things I can do that's going to make it all okay, but it's not quite as straightforward as that. Having said that, there are things that can be trialed out that aren't really difficult to try or to sort of tweak in terms of teaching practice that can be really effective.
And I think it's not to be downhearted as well when you've tried things and they maybe haven't worked. So that trial and error for each individual. So what works with one dyslexic individual might not work in the same way or have the same impact with somebody else. And it's about that individual learning their way of working and what works best for them.
Definitely. And I think again, going back to that low intelligence part, is if someone's struggling to access something, their level of understanding of that topic is going to be less. But also dyslexia can impact, as you said, it impacts spelling, it impacts other things. So how they're sharing that information might need to be different. And I think where schools are busy and that kind of, there's that typical way of presenting and sharing information, if they're struggling with that, it must be because they can't. Not they can't in that format, it's because they can't, which I think where that low intelligence bit kind of comes from. We just have to ask them in a different way, or maybe slow down how much and give them more time to respond.
I think that's a huge area that can be adapted really quickly, is just giving people time to, whether it's to think about information that's being given, to think of an answer to a question they've been asked. And in this busy world, in our busy education system, time is something really hard to claw back and to give sometimes. But I do think that's really valuable for a dyslexic individual of any age.
Yeah, and I think some of this comes to sort of a higher level, doesn't it? So we're going to give some advice for teachers, but some of this comes to the school approach in terms of what we're willing to adapt and do differently to allow those individuals to take in the information more effectively and to give out their ideas, to show their knowledge. So some schools, for example, are doing lots of things in terms of adapting exam questions. Let's put a visual question in there. Can you draw me a mind map of your ideas? And then they might need to be taught to show how to put that into sentences form for a formal examination. But let's give them alternatives that might mean they can work in a quicker way, actually, because that's going to align potentially better with their strengths, their preferred ways of working.
Definitely. I think once you kind of work on some of these support strategies and you kind of remove some of the barriers, I think teachers will see actually what these students are capable of. There's this assumption that it's actually, we've just put some barriers in the way, and if we can remove some of them, we can actually see what they can achieve. And I think once you start to see that difference, you'll then see the benefit of all those barriers, and actually how many barriers can I remove and how far can they go starts to be really interesting. And I still find it quite interesting how many people get diagnosed with dyslexia and things like that at university.
Yes. Yeah, we see that there's large proportions of people who who go through all the way through the education system, and then get diagnosed at university. And there's a lot more support available usually in further education for adults, and they've just found their own way up until that point, which is very similar to my journey as well.
Well, you went even further, didn't you?
Well, yes, yeah. I started working with people, and my colleagues started asking a few questions. But I think I sort of masked a lot of what my difficulties were, and then when you're working around those people who are trained to look at those things and how we work and how we do things, it was maybe a little bit more obvious to them.
And I think often adults, they often have, an inkling or an understanding. Sometimes it goes deeper than that they know that they've found things difficult compared to other people in the classroom or in their learning. But because they've not had anyone recognise that or acknowledge it, that's led them to probably mask that even further often. And they are often, dyslexic people are often very creative in finding, strategies to overcome some of these difficulties. But sometimes that comes at a bit of a cost in terms of that late identification. We meet lots of adults and older people, older learners who, there's the negative connotations that have come with that for them in terms of negative experiences through education and schooling, and the emotional side of it that goes with that can all be really quite challenging for them.
I saw a couple of years ago, might have been last year, it was a headline from somewhere, or somebody said the most stupid thing of, there is no point in getting a dyslexia diagnosis. And I was like, what? And I read it, and the reasoning is because in reality, you're probably not going to get any support because there's no money. And I was like, okay, on that very narrow point of view, I can completely understand. However, so I got diagnosed with autism and ADHD, as listeners know. That was huge for me.
Absolutely.
And my daughter, who's got diagnosed with autism, my other daughter's got diagnosed with ADHD and got told you probably have autism as well. I say to them, that diagnosis is yours and no one else's. It's something for you to understand you, and to understand when people are saying things, it's not you're stupid, you're sick, you're not trying. It's none of those things. Yeah, it's actually, you are going to struggle to do these things. Doesn't mean you can't, but you've got to find your way. And that's what that label is about for me. It's not about a label for everyone. It's not about a label to get something. It's a label for you to understand yourself better. When people are saying things at you, it's more a reflection of their experiences, their understanding and their journey rather than you.
I think my overwhelming feeling of my diagnosis was relief. And I think we hear that often in the voices of parents when their children are given a diagnosis, because they then have some understanding and some reasoning as to why they're having some of those difficulties. And also then there are things that we can start doing and putting in place to support those difficulties. Once they're highlighted, we can put a plan in place and we can get the right support.
Yeah, and it's about being open about those things, isn't it? As you say, Sam, that recognising in yourself as well as others recognising. So, for example, meeting a young person who says, "Oh, my memory's terrible, I can't remember anything." And somebody being able to say to them, well, you know what, we've recognised that it's an area you challenge, that you struggle with a bit. Let's have a look at some things we could do to support with that. Let's look at ways you remember things that you're interested in. What helps you out with that? Is it that you've got a picture of them in your head and you use visualization, for example? Or maybe there's some other things we could teach you, model to you. As a teacher, I can model some ways of remembering information that will help you. And so begin to learn that for themselves with the guidance, with that scaffolding from somebody around them. And with, as you say, without that identification of what that difficulty is, then it's really hard to access that support, isn't it?
I think there's a thing like once you get diagnosed with dyslexia, you can't. It's I can't yet.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, so they can't do that. Okay, can we do it a different way? And that's basically what we're asking is, they can't do it in the way you typically expect them, so what can they do it? Is it a case of they can do it with some support, or we do it a different way, or is it it's just a few things, like back with short-term memory, struggling with that, okay, here are things, try those things, don't just give up on them.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting because a lot of dyslexic people are very determined and they show real determination. And then at the other end of the scale, you've got people who have tried or have a certain mindset around that, and they've lost that determination, or they've never been able to develop it because those things have not been supported in the right way or talked about in the right way. Some of that, I think, is very much linked to the language used around dyslexia and specific learning differences, both at school and at home. And we've talked about this as a charity in terms of the importance of using the language of things like "I can't do it yet," or my brain works in a slightly different way, as opposed to "there's something wrong with my brain" or "wrong with my child." And we see that a lot. We know why parents have that perception, because their child might not be learning in the same way as their peers, or they're not progressing at the same rate. But that language around saying there's something wrong with you, then creates that feeling that I can't do it. Whereas if we can recognise that I can do it, but I need to do it, as you say, in a different way, or maybe we need to have a slightly different type of level of support at the moment, then that begins to sort of breed that positivity and that determination, I think.
I know someone who's in year 9 and they're dyslexic, and I don't know much about the school life, but in my head, it's what they're struggling with is how to understand and present and share that information, the in and the out. And I think they're not aspirational for them, which meant they now don't try. Because it's like, if I don't do the work, nothing happens. If I don't try, they're like, oh, well. And you're like, okay, I'm not saying give them tensions. I'm not saying motivate them through pain. But actually, you should be aspirational, and you should be identifying. It's not they can't do the work. It's not that work. It's actually how is that accessed is the important part. But they're talking to them, and it's already like they're giving up because of people are giving up on them.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's not a sort of celebration of what they can do. Often the school system, it creates that, doesn't it? We've got these expectations. We expect this output. And on a regular daily basis, some dyslexic people are not being able to meet those objectives that are being given, they're set out for them. And it's constantly feeling like they're failing, or they don't even know how to get started with achieving those objectives, which can be really hard.
So we're talking about what dyslexia is. If we kind of come back to that classroom environment, if you kind of go through your typical day or lessons, what are some of the barriers that people may not even think of are barriers?
So I think a really typical everyday classroom activity like copying off a board is really demanding process-wise. So if you are asking a child to copy down the date and the title, so that's their first instruction before we're getting on to any work or looking into anything that we're doing. First of all, if you do struggle with spelling and you look up at the board and you're looking at the day and you don't know how to spell that, you might have to look up several times before you get that down on your piece of paper. You're also trying to focus on handwriting. There's a big celebration around handwriting, but that doesn't always support those with difficulties around that and how they can then achieve what their peers are achieving. So they may look up and down several times. If you've got short-term and working memory difficulties, you might have forgotten what the date is after you've written 3 letters. It might be a word, but you're looking up. So this process of going from here to here, that short-term and working memory, that information's gone. So what is seen as a very simple expectation of copy this down from the board is very demanding for a dyslexic learner and may take them 10 minutes. And that's 10 minutes into their learning time where they get to show what they do actually know about this topic or this area of working. So for something that is it's given as an instruction and it's brushed off quite quickly of just copy that off the board and then we'll get on with what we're doing today, actually is very demanding. And then if you've made spelling errors within that and you have to go back and check that, we're not looking at any topic or focus, we're looking at copying the date and the title. Some schools ask you to copy objectives and things like that, particularly as children get older into secondary school. There's a lot of demand on that before you've even started doing any of the work you're being asked to do. So I think as a very stereotypical, every single day, every classroom activity that is asked to do, that one is a huge barrier for some dyslexic learners.
And it's interesting, I'm just literally thinking, how often do I write the date other than on a form? And I never write the date down because the Word document knows when I created it, when I last modified it. My email tells me the date it arrived and the date I sent it. Everything is automatically dated and timed and everything for me. And it's just, and I kind of get, what you do. But if you're writing in an exercise book, it's in chronological order. I know. I find it interesting as we look back and go, oh yeah, you get used to it, because when you write letters, you always write the date, but we don't write letters anymore. We do email. And yeah, I do. It's one of those simple things that is just so, just write down what we're doing when we're doing it. It just sounds so simple, but it is a big barrier.
Yeah, and I think the point is that some of these things, you may want that information to be in the child's book, and that's okay. But there's other ways of them getting that in the book that don't need to be quite so onerous for them, or time consuming, and get them set off on that trajectory straight away in the lesson of, I'm already struggling with the first basic task that everybody else has done really quickly, or at least that's what it appears to them. So, at a simple level, we could adapt that by having that information right in front of them, so they're not having to look up and down and then somebody stands up and gets in the way. There's less distractions. It's easier for them. They've not got as far to move in terms of their tracking of that information. And or do they need to copy that information? So, for example, the learning objectives, why not present them on a printed piece of paper or a tablet in front of them, and let's instead spend some time making sure that we all understand what those learning objectives mean. Because that's the other real key thing with copying for students, is they'll report that I've copied it down and I've got no idea what it says, because I've just spent all my energy and effort literally copying it, and without being able to take it in. So then, as like Sam said, they're already on the back foot, aren't they, in terms of getting on with that work? Because then they've got to sit and look and think, right, what does this mean? Or start looking at, all right, what's everyone doing? Well, I best just copy what they're doing because I haven't had a chance to get to grips with the activity. So I think it's really important that teachers just stop and think, why am I asking the children to do this task? What's it going to achieve? And if there's a different way we could achieve that, or it's not going to achieve anything in particular in terms of actually copying it, then why am I doing it? I think some of those things are just those ways of doing things that have been around for ages, so we just keep doing them, don't we, without questioning it.
Yeah, and I think that then extends on to other things. So then there are things that we need them to do and write down and copy. So things like then copying down homework when you get to high school, and homework's presented on the board. You've got 2 minutes to write your homework down. Can you copy these spellings off the board? If you struggle with spelling and then you are asked to spell words that you probably don't know in a really short amount of time, the likelihood is that you're not going to copy them down accurately. Sometimes, as Jane said, they'll be copying the information for homework and things like that, and then when they come back to what they've written down, they'll have no idea what they're expected to do, what it's for, when is it due in, how long have they got, all these other things. So this simple activity of copying actually then brings up a huge number of barriers within the first few minutes of a lesson.
I think a lot of schools are moving to things like Google Classroom, and my daughter's school uses class charts, and all the homework is in class charts. And it's almost to the point of, if a teacher says there's homework and it's not in class charts, the kids can ignore it, which I think is great. If it's not in class charts, I do not have to do it. But if you don't, but I like that because it is, the information's there. It's written by the teacher. My nephew in primary school used to have the spelling lists on the board. Write down the spelling list and learn them. He would often write some of them down wrong, learn the incorrect spelling, and then get the spelling test wrong. Not through lack of effort, not through lack of anything, but with his difficulties, he could not write down those words quickly in the right amount of time he was given to get them down. And then a photo. Take a photo of what's on the board. That would be so much easier. But no, phone's bad.
That's it. And there's lots of, assistive technology there. You've mentioned two things. So a classroom platform where homework can be presented, and phones to take a snapshot of a list or an instruction or something that they've got to take away can be so valuable, not just for that person, but then to share with the parents and say, this is what I've been asked to do. Can you help me with that? That's so much more clearer to the parents, hopefully, than maybe a bit of scroll that they've scribbled down on a piece of paper, hoping that they've got all the information that they need.
Definitely. So that literally starts a nice, simple stance activity. And I guess in some ways it can get harder from there.
Yeah, during the day, that's it. And it builds up, doesn't it? So we all know, if you've got kids, you know that across the course of the week, they get more tired. Across the course of the term, they get more tired. And for a dyslexic person, that often is across the course of the day. These things build up, as I say. And it's not just the processing. The processing's hard, then the work's hard. And then it's that impact on your stamina, isn't it? Your resilience to keep going. Because if you are faced with a lot of challenges quite frequently throughout the day, understandably, you're probably going to become less motivated to try. You talked about that earlier, Dale, which I thought was really interesting, because we meet learners, particularly at secondary age, who are actively doing things within the classroom to be sent out to isolation because that is easier for them than not being able to do the work. And luckily, that is quite rare, I would say, in terms of the kids we meet. But when you do meet children who are saying that to you, that's really quite sad, isn't it? That they are actively choosing to miss out on learning in the classroom, and most of the time in isolation. The children we speak to, that they're not being given really any or much work in isolation. It's just a way of managing them outside the classroom, isn't it? Putting them somewhere safe. They can't access the work, so they behave in a way that they know, they're not having to be in the classroom, and that is for them easier. But of course, it just creates so many more gaps for them with their learning, that then the next time they're in the classroom, then it's even harder for them. And the school often see that as a behavioural problem, yep. Which, it is a behavioural outcome, but it comes from an underlying reason, which is what we need to understand to be able to support them better.
And I think, the exclusion is a lot, but I do think there's probably a lot of children who are getting detentions for not doing that homework.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they didn't do that homework. And we assume they just couldn't be bothered. They didn't want to try, not caring. They generally care a lot. They're trying, but they've got barriers and there's a lack of support, and they're trying. And then you give them detentions. That's another showing of you don't want to support me. And it is a spiral that they didn't start, but they are in.
Yeah, and I think there are other things that are linked to everyday classroom things. So, for example, forgetting your PE kit. We often dyslexic learners have difficulty with organising. It might be organising their work, but it might be organising themselves in terms of, right, it's Tuesday, I need my indoor PE kit, this is what I need, and I need to have that ready to take with me. If they're in secondary school, they may need certain books on certain days. Again, it's that organisation of what will I need throughout the day. And even things, other subjects like cooking. If you need to get your cooking ingredients, you need to have them the day before, hopefully, that you've informed your parents that you're doing that activity. But then it's getting all of that ready in your bag, getting it to school, getting it to where it needs to be. So again, this trait of having difficulties of organising, and it's impacting on a daily basis, and then those outcomes happen again. You get a detention for not having your PE kit, or you've forgotten your cooking ingredients again, and then there's usually a sort of punishment or a consequence attached to that, which then has this continuous negative impact on us.
My daughter is a great one for coming into the bedroom at 7:30 in the morning going, I've got cooking today.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, cool, that should be fine. I need puff pastry. Cool, that's not a local Tesco Express thing. That's the big Tesco. It's 7:30 and I'm just getting out of bed. And okay. I'll go and do it. Yeah, we try and prompt her as much as possible, but sometimes we forget. Yeah, she struggles with organisation. I got it. I gave it to her as she was walking to school. I literally stopped next to her, gave her cooking stuff, and off she went to school. My other daughter forgets her PE kit sometimes. It's generally not intentional. It's generally when life is going on. Yes. Life's a bit busy. She forgets. She sends me a message, and I'll immediately just send a letter to school saying, Maisie's hurt her ankle. I'm literally, it's like, I don't... Exercise is important. Loads of things are important about PE. But Well, the reason she forgot her PE kit is something to do with life. Yeah, and she's not getting attention for that. So, yeah, I will every time I will send an email in saying Maisie's done this, hurt this, done. Yeah, you're not having detention for that.
Well, sadly, in my son's last school, you had to have your PE kit even if you were injured. Even if you have got your arm in a cast, you have to get changed into PE kit. So that excuse wouldn't have cut it.
Wow.
So the thing she says, I'm looking at her going, apparently you're now not allowed to brush your hair in school.
Oh.
Why? Because apparently it prevents learning.
Right.
I'm waiting for the letter. It's only been said verbally. I'm waiting for this letter to come home so I can read it and understand it. So if you get caught brushing your hair, it is a detention.
Wow. I think there's some things, isn't there, that we know, it's important for young people to learn boundaries and learn about, their responsibilities as a young person. But I think some schools do lose a little bit of sight of what is sort of common sense in the real world. If you went to work and you'd forgotten a piece of equipment, depending on your job, you're probably not going to get a huge sanction for that. You're probably going to go to your boss and say, do you know what, I had a bit of a rough night last night and I've forgotten, this happened at home this morning. Any chance I could pop out and get this, or is there a spare one in the building? It's just people would generally be much more understanding, wouldn't they, and give time to understand what's going on for that person. I think that's the bit that we find really hard when we meet young people who are struggling. Is it feels like sometimes that nobody is really taking the time to understand them and what they need and what's causing these difficulties for them. And as Sam said, sometimes for lots of people that results in those organisational difficulties, and they just need a bit of extra guidance with that.
And I don't know if it's a neurodivergent thing, but when you look at a rule and go, that is just stupid. I knew that as a child, and I would argue with the teachers it was a stupid rule. I had to follow it. I'm going, why? And they couldn't really give you an answer apart from it's the rule.
It's the rule.
Yeah.
And you're literally going, I know this isn't going to. And you just, I was a nightmare. I apologise to every teacher who ever had me.
And we do meet some schools who are being really supportive and what I would say, more modern approach to education.
Absolutely.
And to treat these young people like they're individuals and recognise that sometimes things happen, give you a chance to explain. But unfortunately, I don't think that's the norm across most of the education sector in the UK. And I think some of that I think is linked to the curriculum as well, isn't it? There's this pressure to get through all these topics because the government says we need to. And yet some of these things, we would as typical adults struggle to sort of understand why some of those things are needing to be covered and at such pace as well.
I think since we were all at school, probably at slightly different times, judging by my hair colour and yours, is when I was at school and the business world wasn't a million miles apart. Yeah, I remember getting on the bus on the way to school and everyone was in suits. Everyone is in that typical 90s, 80s kind of wear, going to suit, the beigey raincoat, a weirdy colour. It was just everyone did the same and all the women with the long... And then over time, that's all changed. How people dress to work. They got more casual, still respectful, still smart. They understand they're there to do a job. The technology, the way people communicate, everything about that role has changed. Everyone used to have briefcases. I'm not entirely sure what was in the briefcase. And now you get most people, they don't even take laptops. They do it on that. So everything about that life and our working life has changed. Yet school looks exactly the same for my children, or even some ways backwards, other ways forwards, but it doesn't look a million miles from when I was at school.
Yeah, I would agree. The vast majority of large comprehensive schools are working towards that same process system that they were before, and I think that the rules, the boundaries around that seems to be we'll employ more rules to try and manage the higher numbers of students, and what we see is the more challenging behaviour that is coming out, as opposed to moving forward to that. Okay, what do we actually need in terms of these young people and the future world of work? And that's one of the things that I think can be really empowering for dyslexic learners, is allowing them to offer their ideas, think about things in the way that works for them, and share that way of thinking that can be really valuable.
I think it is. I also think going to talk about different topics is why are we studying this topic? Why are we reading? My daughter is in GCSE year in spectacles. She hates, as does every other child, it appears. It's just why are we studying these books? Because it's the curriculum. That's not a good enough reason. Yeah, there should be a reason to help me understand why am I learning this book. The book doesn't really matter in reality, but you're learning this book because these are the skills we want you to get. That sort of explanation to my daughter would really help.
Yeah.
And why am I doing this topic? Why am I learning about this part of the world? Why? In reality, it doesn't matter which part of the world we study, but what we're looking at is how you understand the differences and how you can use that in later. Those sorts of things to help people understand why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? What is the point? What am I supposed to be getting out of it? If I was at school and someone gave me a checklist in English of this is what you're supposed to be learning, I would have gone through that checklist to understand what it was. I would have understood it. I would have made sure I got it, and I would have worked through and got myself through there. Actually, I had no idea what I was supposed to be learning in English. We're doing Romeo and Juliet. I didn't know what I was supposed to get from it, and I just about scraped my GCSEs because I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing or why. What was the benefit? And I think in work, we all know what we're doing and why we're doing it. We have a schedule. We have a plan. And whatever it is you're doing, there's always a kind of this is what we're doing and why. You know. So you know why you're doing it. And I think at school, that's not always there.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And in terms of dyslexic learners, in our specialist tuition, what we do a lot of is helping them to understand how they learn best and why we're doing the things we are. So, for example, if we're doing memory activities, well, why are we doing those activities? It's because we know that that's something you find difficult, and these are ways you can support with it. And then you can take these back into the classroom and, right, tell me however you use those things in the classroom, what are you doing with those strategies? It's that metacognition, understanding how I learn, that's going to help me. And as you say, if there was more of that brought into the teaching, okay, we're doing this topic and this is why. And the other thing that really helps dyslexic learners is having that context before you start. So often dyslexic people find the detail quite hard, that, the accuracy of the word reading and the smaller points of spelling, the letters and things. But the context part, the bigger picture, is often where they will excel and find that easier. So we start off with the why, this is the context, this is the bigger picture, then we can start to delve down into the details. That often will really help them. But as you say, we'll give all students a good understanding of why is this important, what it means, what the context is in the real world and in your future as well.
That context bit is, I think, people don't understand how important it is for, I think, neurodivergent learners.
Yeah.
If I'm interested in something, I will just go to the nth degree. It will be my new hyperfocus and I'm off. If it is Romeo and Juliet in English, GCSE years, I am asleep, I am bored, I do not know anything about it. However, ask me to sing you any advert from that same era when I was watching TV and I'm there. Don't know why that was relevant, but it was obviously I was enjoying some TV or whatever. So that context, enjoyment, why am I doing this? I hated school from secondary onwards, hated college. I didn't go to university. All I've ever done since I finished that is learn. So it's not I'm against learning, it's what I'm learning and why I'm learning, and that's the context part.
Yeah, the way that it was being presented to you probably as well, I think, is a big part of that.
Yeah, the how.
The other thing that I think we notice is really empowering, and which teachers can consider in terms of supporting dyslexic learners, is allowing them to discover that learning for themselves. So, for example, learning a new topic in history, let's do a fact-finding activity. It could be that we move around the classroom and find facts if we think we can expect our class to not get completely out of control. Or we do it on a desk with a partner. We do some matching up some facts, or it could be that we've got sentences chopped up and we want them to put the sentences back together. We could have pictures and facts we're matching up, or a timeline of events. And if we do that as a way of introducing a new topic, then immediately learners are likely to be quite engaged and interested because they're being allowed to explore for themselves, which is what learning is all about, isn't it? it was fascinating. We did a session during Dyslexia Awareness Week. We did lots of sessions in schools for classes of children. And one of the things we do is we look at famous dyslexic people and what they've achieved. And we have pictures and we get them to match up the facts, and they go around the classroom and have lots of fun. And then we sat down at the end, we were talking about what we'd learned and what we'd discovered. And one boy, I think this was in the year 5 class, year 4 or 5 class, so he wasn't a particularly old learner, said, do you know what? I just want to do more of this. I said, well, we're finished now. He said, oh, but I've loved finding all of this for myself. I got to do it myself. And I was like, you've literally just put a nail in the head of exactly what we did. And he's articulated exactly what we did. And he recognised that he found it really engaging. And he was disappointed that, normal class is going to resume now where we get told information and then we try and do something with it, as opposed to discovering it for ourselves, which can be really powerful for making links in the memory as well.
There is something about I love the idea of project-based work, because I think employment generally is project-based work for lots of people. Doing a project, recording a podcast, this is a project for all of us. Yeah, there's lots of things going on, but we know what the project is, we know the outcome, what we're going to get out of it. It's quite easy, and I do my bits, you do your bits, we all prepare. We know what we're doing. And everything for me in the adult life is a project. So I've got to start, I've got to do my research. So I'm on the Dyslexia Sparks website, looking all around at you all. What are you doing? Oh, cool, where are they? Okay, they're up there. You do all that stuff. I'm doing it on my own. And I think school, as you said, we're being told stuff and we have to do something with it. You don't always have to do something with it. The aim is actually being told stuff and remember it, and that's it. And how you use that in an exam. But I think schools, I really hope that with the curriculum and assessment review, they're going to bring more project-based stuff back. Because that's a bit that I was a child I loved. Yeah. Doing something on my own, doing my own research, finding it out, doing that bit that I found interesting. The person next to me found something else interesting. They did it differently.
And then you've got that collaborative working then as well, though, haven't you? Where you are actually then all finding out your favourite or your interesting bits, and then bringing all that together, so you can then make links with the things they've found out, and you discuss that and talk about why those things are potentially linked or not linked, or how they impacted one another, and then you bring so many other social skills together with that as well. So there's a whole raft of other positives that come not just from the facts and the information you find, but those collaborative ways of working and working with other people, and potentially people that you might not always work with in your class.
And also you find out what I thought was really boring, you found interesting. When you start talking about it, I made an assumption, but when you start talking about it, going, oh, that is interesting. And so you learn from each other, and also kind of where you go with it. Like, I find this is something at work, because we're having a conversation, and my head's, I've got these steps in order. And I get to this point, and I went that way, my colleague went a completely different direction. And things like that, where you just watch someone else work, and you think about what they're going to say, and they're going, oh, I did that topic, they're going to find about this. Oh, they did something else. Oh, I missed that. Where was that come from? And then you go, where did you find out about? And it's just so much more interesting to everyone, rather than everyone presenting the same bit of information about the same thing. That's not fun. That's not interesting. No one, not even the teacher, would enjoy that.
And for teachers, isn't that a great way as well of getting insight into who your learners are, how they go about tasks, and what interest excites them, that then can inform you as a teacher in terms of what you do next. So, let's say you have said, right, tomorrow we're going to be doing this topic on, I want you to go off and find out 3 facts or 3 pieces of information about this thing, come back and tell me. Then you've got a base, haven't you? You know where you started with, what they've done, how they've approached it. And I think that's really powerful then, in terms of thinking about what you do next, in terms of how you deliver the next piece of learning, what activities you decide to do. Yeah,
but it's
great.
Also really leveling in the fact that you're giving me a something to do, an activity, with some freedom. I've got time, so I might not understand what you're asking of me yet, but I can go home. Mum, Dad, I've got to do this. Get some input from them. Let's go do some internet search, and let's go do this. Let's find this out. Let's watch a video. Let's do this. Cool. How have you got to give the information? She said, tell them. Cool. Do you want to write some bullets down to help you? Do you want to draw it? Do you want to make a poster and talk them through the poster? Would that help you talk? So then you have the freedom, not only of what you're researching, but how you then share that information. And there are children who are great at standing up there and talking for an hour. It's hard to stop them. And then there are those who don't have that confidence, but often what they say, they find the most insightful things, but it's that confidence standing up. So again, that sort of work, you're giving them the freedom to share that information, how it works for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All sorts of advantages, I think, to that sort of approach. Yeah. And I think the thing is that it's igniting that passion for learning, isn't it? That's the bit that I think a lot of teachers who've been around for a long time would say that the curriculum has become a bit dry in a lot of places, especially, in terms of how we're delivering, what we're expected to go through. And it's my view is that to some extent we're just dampening down those chances and that opportunity to think for yourself and use your brain.
And the creativity around that as well, like you say, if you can give this output in all different ways, that's amazing. And you will have some that will write pages, and you'll have some that make a video, and some that draw a picture, and then you're seeing all their strengths as well, the strengths and their enjoyment.
But also the teachers who are all delivering the same curriculum in the exact same way are all bored as well. They're not bringing what they're excited about into the class. They're not showing their passion to get the children excited as well.
Yeah.
It's just, it needs changing. It needs changing. And we talk about this and it will benefit every child. But I think, that freedom in how you share information, they talk about in the curriculum and assessment review, I really hope they change and bring some other things back away from just high stakes exams at all levels. Because once there are different options at high stakes exams, then throughout that time in education, they'll be doing different ones to prepare them. And I think that will have a huge impact in how things are taught, how things are expected to be returned. And then that might be a thing where teachers now see children doing something that they assumed they couldn't, because they're not doing it in a written. They're drawing a cartoon. They're telling the most amazing story through a cartoon, and in your head you're going, "Well, they couldn't write me a story. They just wrote 4 lines." Yeah, it's not the ideas they're struggling with; it's the writing.
And then we see strategies around that. So you will have children who have the most amazing ideas, the most amazing vocabulary as well. That's what's really interesting. And verbally could, like you say, talk your head off. And then you get excited about all these ideas and you say, go write them all down for me. And they come back with maybe a couple of lines, and none of those words that they used with none of that enthusiasm is there, because they maybe can't spell those words. So rather than showing that they can't spell them, they'll put a simpler word in. And we see that quite often in dyslexic learners in terms of their verbal abilities, and their written outputs are miles apart. And I think that's something that teachers could notice, quite easily in a classroom, to maybe start looking at identifying children who are dyslexic and things like that. That is a key indicator for me, and the sorts of things that we would recommend teachers to look out for.
And there's some really simple adaptations with that in particular, isn't there, Sam? In terms of, at a very basic level, when they're telling you all those ideas, just get them to record them on a sound button or a dictaphone, whatever you've got available in the classroom. And then when you're asking them to get those ideas out onto paper, you might adapt what that output looks like, but if it is sentences, they can at least refer back to it and listen to it. And yes, spelling might be a difficulty for them. We can look at ways to support with that, but often as well, the difficulty is remembering all those ideas as well, isn't it? And so I stopped to try and spell a word, and then all my processing resources have gone. I've forgotten what I wanted to say. That's another key thing that happens often. And as I said, I don't think that's, to me, seems like quite a fairly easy adaptation in the classroom to have some sort of recording thing that they can then sit and listen back to be able to get their ideas out in a more effective way.
My ADHD, I really struggle with structuring stuff. So my written work was, again, I looked through my primary school's reports. They was very vocal, very great ideas, great shares, great, but it doesn't show in his written work. And I looked through it all going, yeah, this is so obvious now, but back then. So I think looking for a big difference in what they're saying and what they're writing. Dyslexia is a big thing, but it could be other things. But that's showing they're capable of it, but it's how you're asking them to present it is where they are struggling.
Yeah, it often is. Yeah. And the other thing I think can be really helpful with that on a sort of more regular basis during the school day is when we're asking them to show the knowledge, we can adapt the way they're doing that in terms of what we provide them. So, for example, if we're asking a student to write some answers to some questions and they have to write everything out in full sentences, but the task is geography, we want to know, can they remember those facts? Can they identify the correct information from this topic? Do we need them to write all of that in full sentences, or do we want to know that they've understood the concept and they've got the knowledge, in which case we could use a fillable form where we've got some sentences with them words missing, because then that takes the pressure off and the cognitive processing off them for at least one activity. We get what we need, which is that we know that they understand this topic and they can identify the right words to go in some gaps, for example. And then that allows them to process. They've got more processing resources left for what might be, a challenging task where, let me say, right, now we want you to argue the point about this concept in your own words, and they've got more left for that because we've not asking them to do, as much with the writing throughout the full lesson, for example, by making those little adaptations.
And one of the things I think we talked about at the beginning is when you're asking questions, that processing time is you can ask the question to a child A and then go, I'll come back to you, and then ask the question to child B. And then just give them that little bit more time. Just go, right, Scott, have a think about, blah, 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 I'll come back to you, right, blah, blah. And it just gives them a bit more time. It's just that time to process, think about how they're going to answer it, bring those thoughts together, they can answer the question. That's a simple change, such a simple change, but can make so much difference.
Yeah, we see that. I see that a lot in assessments when we even just sort of conversational questions. You might ask a question and the child is quiet for a few seconds and you're starting to think, okay, do they not know how to answer this, or do they need a bit more time? Pause a bit longer, and then all of a sudden it comes and then it doesn't stop, and it is just that processing time. And as you say, posing those questions, right, I'm going to give you some time to think about that, I'll come back to you. Or can you build on what somebody else has just said rather than having to think from right at the beginning, giving them that little bit of a scaffold there maybe might be helpful as well. And that's some ways maybe you can allow them to then show what they know, rather than assuming that pause means they don't know the answer.
That thing, that pause and that waiting that bit longer is a powerful thing. And it takes confidence, and might be you're going, and you don't want to say, okay, if you don't know, I'll go on to someone else. You're saying you don't know, you haven't answered quickly enough. So it's being that patient person. So having that pause. When they're looking at you, you've got to be non-judgmental. Yeah, you've got to be not also going, come on, you've got time. No, it's all right, it's all right. No, come on. Yeah, we've got time, we can wait. It's like, shut up, I'm trying to think.
Absolutely. Yeah, being asked another question while you're trying to think about a question is not easy.
Or just someone giving a commentary to fill the silence.
Yeah,
Don't need to do that either. Yeah. I'm trying to get the thoughts going, and I'm struggling with that going on.
Yeah.
And you'll know with the different children that maybe you've done that pause and they couldn't answer. You'll talk to them afterwards, and you'll find, okay, that's not what we do. Okay, try a different thing. But I think having that longer pause, trying it once or twice, seeing what happens is again a small change, powerful. Might not work. Talk to them about it. That's the thing. I think most dyslexic and neurodivergent people, we all know what works for us, and we can pick that up from a younger age than people realise. So having that conversation with the children, if they struggled with something, what is it you were struggling with? Don't assume you can't. What is it you were struggling with? So I asked you that question. You weren't able to answer. Maybe ask them to answer, but just work out how can we work together to get you to be able to answer.
Yeah, I think what we find is interesting actually is that although I think dyslexic people and I agree, sometimes from a young age, can work out what they need and they know what helps, but they're not often used to being asked. And that then can make it difficult for them to articulate that. So I think that sometimes they do need that. They need that support in terms of, do you know what, I noticed that you were struggling with that. Why do you think that was? And they, as I say, quite often you ask them, what do you dislike about school? Well, I don't like English. Well, why is that? I don't really know. I just find it hard, and you have to unpick that sometimes. And I think, as I say, from our experience, I think that's sometimes because they're not used to being asked those questions. Because, as you say, teachers potentially, sometimes I think it's down to the pressure of time, isn't it? They just make assumptions about why children aren't doing things or responding or doing things a certain way, and then move on. Sometimes it's just lack of experience, understanding, and that's where they're at in terms of their career, teaching experience. But yeah, that process of being able to ask questions and help the child to think about their own learning can be really powerful.
And sometimes we have to help with that comparison. You go, okay, so you're struggling with English, you're struggling with your writing, yeah. But when we did history, we did the Vikings, you wrote loads. So it's not the writing, it's something else, or it's something. And it might be, I read all about the Vikings, I've learned all those spellings at home, so I'm really confident. Whatever it is, it's just, they might not know why, and you have to do that fact finding with them, using comparisons. And then you'll find, generally you'll work out the answer. And it might be a light bulb moment for them they've never realised. But now you know just how to do that support.
Yeah, and that's how helping them to be explicit about that strategy they're using. So, for example, I was really interested in that topic in history. I went off and I read loads about it, and we were talking about it, and I watched horrible histories. There's all, and you're right, okay, so how can we apply that to maybe some of the other topics? There was lots of extra things you did there to help you with that topic, but because you were interested rather than thinking you needed to, and then helping them be more explicit about it.
Cool. So before we wrap up, anything we haven't covered that you want to get in?
Oh, wow.
We could be here all day.
Let's pause.
I think an important one for me, well, there's a couple of things in it. An important one for me is assistive technology, and this is something we really support in our charity. Before you even start with assistive technology, there are barriers to that. Lots of things like cost is a huge one. Understanding what technology can be used for and how it can be used. How we explain that to others in a classroom environment can be quite difficult for some people. And also being allowed to use that. And that's something that we get spoken to a lot from our students is, I wouldn't be allowed to do this in school. And that is because it's maybe very different to what their environment is. Some of the other barriers could be that some teachers, some parents don't know what sort of technologies are available. And I think that's really key in terms of supporting some of those difficulties, is knowing what's out there to be able to support them. So for our charity, we do a loan scheme, for example, on reader pens, so that they are expensive. There's a financial outlay for either parents or schools. And going back to what works best for that individual. So we could recommend that to 10 individuals, and then 3 of them come back and go, do you know, that really just doesn't work for me. I can't get to grips with it. I don't like it. And then that's okay. We can work on a different strategy or a different support. But some of them take that piece of technology and it gives them lots of the things that we've talked about, the positive side, that independence, that drive to want to go learn, that drive to move on and do things in a different way. And the only way we can do that inclusively is make those things available and the norm. We talk a lot about some people having laptops and things, and those can be given for lots of different reasons, not just dyslexia. But it's knowing that that's a normal way of working for some people, and it doesn't take away some of their difficulties, but it gives them a way of an output. So I think in terms of other barriers that are there to dyslexic learners within the classroom, assistive technology is a huge support, but within that one area, there are lots of barriers within that, and being able to explore those things is not always easy. I'm a massive lover of audiobooks and things like that. So being able to listen to information or stories or things that I'm potentially studying is so much better for me. It's so much more enjoyable. It's not as tiring. And we see that in some of our learners as well. They don't read, they don't pick up a book, but give them an audio book. They're listening to words and vocabulary and getting excited about stories and giving them ideas for their writing. So there are elements of technology there that are readily available in the real world that they maybe don't have access to in a school or a classroom environment that would be really beneficial to them.
I think with both of those, the main thing I get from that is that independence.
Yes.
If you're relying on someone to give you information, if you're relying on your parents to read you a book, if you're relying on someone in this class to help you with this, then you are literally disabled in anything you want to do. As soon as you can give them that way to be independent, and things like, I know Audible you have to pay for, but there's things like listening books. I think RNIB Bookshare, they're both free or low cost, so that you can access loads of books and you can choose a book you want. You're not limited on choice. There's loads of stuff and you can go and find out. And the same way with the scanning pen type thing, I want to learn about my game. Cool, there's a guide. I can read it on my own now. I can learn about my game. I'm not having to have someone else help take me through it. And that, once you become independent in that, then you have that love of learning will grow.
Absolutely. And we see this more and more with older students as well, who don't want to sit with their parents to read a book, but maybe their friends are talking about a particular story or series of books that they can't access. There's lots of books now available with QR codes where you buy the book, you've got the print there in front of you, but then also it can read it to you through the QR code. There's things like Kindles, there's so many things that open doors that maybe weren't there 20 or 30 years ago that are so valuable to supporting in our journey, not just as children, but going into the workplace. And how is this going to impact my daily routine? All of us work on a computer in our jobs at some point, I would imagine, during the day, even if it's on your phone. If you don't sit at a desk or a computer, there'll be some element of your job that's used in technology. And I think, can we embrace that from a younger age to support what some of the dyslexic difficulties are?
And I think there's some be surprised as well at the impact that can have in some quite basic what we might think are quite basic ways. We had a younger learner who had a reading pen with us and was using that in school to read the dinner menu, and up until that point had chosen the same thing every day for lunch because they knew what that was on the menu and they knew they liked it. And then all of a sudden, they can use this reader pen and it opens up a whole new world of, oh, look, there's something else I could have for lunch. And that's not just an impact on their learning, is it? It's about their well-being, their happiness, their enjoyment of school, their enjoyment of their break time, which is meant to be, the downtime from learning. And then they're going to go into the afternoon feeling more fulfilled and happy and ready for learning. And, it's just those little things that you wouldn't necessarily anticipate as an outcome of something like that are so wonderful to hear.
It's a really great example of how masking, we always think of masking maybe in an academic way, they're hiding their learning, they're doing this, but actually that was masking. I can't read anything, but I know there's always a jacket potato with cheese. I will always have jacket potato with cheese. It's not my favourite thing, but no one knows I can't read the menu that way, so that's nice and safe. I don't have to tell anyone. But as soon as you do that, actually, where else was they masking in that way?
Yeah, that's really true.
Did they always let their brother choose what to watch on TV because they couldn't actually read or know what was on TV? It's all those little choices they couldn't make. They couldn't read the choices.
Yeah, and then that's the impact on their self-esteem, their confidence, isn't it? Thinking, I can't do it, I'm relying on someone else. Like you say, that independence part is really important, and that masking. And we meet, learners who are impeccably behaved and they're doing just fine in school according to the teachers, and then we assess them and we sometimes absolutely staggered at where they're at with their skills. And Sam and I, on a regular basis say to each other, how would this person be accessing the curriculum? I just don't understand what's going on, and yet it must just be that they're masking so well, but they're getting on with what they're asked to do to a level, and people aren't noticing, unfortunately.
And I think that's the other thing is the self-esteem and the mental health side of things that we recognise on a daily basis in our roles. That the world as it is, our country as it is, there is a pandemic of mental health issues in young people. And if you have a specific learning difference, you are twice as likely to experience something around that. And I think, again, going on to what you said about the dinner menu, it's not just the academic side where that's impacted. It's your social interactions, the additional activities you maybe potentially want to do out of school but really don't have the confidence to do that because you're worried about some of those things that you find difficult, whether it be remembering a dance routine and having that memory, those memory strategies to recall a routine, or recall instructions or something like that, learning a new skill and having somebody with the patience to guide you through learning a new skill. And I think as teachers, what we see very often is when they come for specialist tuition, that increase in self-esteem, that willingness to give it a go and to make mistakes and know that is okay. I think that is really important in terms of what we see. But going back to that diagnosis as well of that understanding of themselves and thinking, okay, I know I found remembering things a little bit tricky, but instead of just learning information, we give them strategies of how to remember information, how to learn things, which then they can take away from the world of the academic world, but also they can apply across the curriculum. So it's not just for one individual subject. We do teach a lot around literacy and maths and things like that, but actually the strategies we teach, the revision strategies we teach, can then go across every area of the curriculum as well.
And we use numeracy and literacy in every aspect of our life. We don't notice it. If you have that barrier, you're going to be struggling in so many places. So giving them those strategies around literacy, memory, organisation, all of that, you are unlocking their future life.
Absolutely.
I'm going to wrap it up there. I know we can keep talking. I keep talking for too long. Louise Selby tells me off. So thank you for having the show today. As always, we're sharing Jane and Samantha's contact details, and you can find all their contact details, how to follow them on all the different socials, visit the website and what they do for support schools, all in the show notes. And as always, you'll find the show notes wherever you listen to the podcast or on the Sendcast website. If you want to get in touch, let us know your thoughts, suggest topics or anything else, please message us through our social media accounts, or send an email to hello@thesendcast.com. The Sendcast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. And do you know about our AI features in our assessment software? Teachers can use our AI to help write reports or summarise progress. Teachers choose the key achievements or key next steps for each pupil, so it is very personalised. And the AI takes the hard work away, turning what you want to focus on and turning it into a lovely paragraph of text. And the system can also translate it into 40 different languages, so helping to engage parents where English is not their first language. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through our assessment software and its AI features. So thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Sendcast. This is goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.
Bye, everyone.